7:41, let's bring you up to date with the front pages of the newspapers. They're shaping up like this.
The Telegraph leading with the police commissioner's apology after a serving metropolitan officer was discovered as a serial rapist.
The Guardian also featuring PC David Carrick and his brutal campaign of rape and terror.
And the Express asks how the police missed the serial rapist over 20 years. And that's the big question and the big concern. I think we've got to have a word. This is in all the newspapers. That's the Times talks about the
mass walkout. Unions, teachers have decided that they will be walking out. And the Mirror says that paying tribute to actress.
Actress what? You wanted to continue. Can you not speak Italian? I thought you were a multilinguist.
Lola Brigida.
No, Gina Lollobrigida.
Right.
And anyway, well, a beautiful, beautiful woman, very talented actress, and there she is. She died yesterday at the age of 95. Guys, we just got to talk first of all about that headline over all the front of the newspapers, Claire, about this awful, hideous monster, David Carrick.
The more you read about his litany of crimes, it just makes you wonder what on earth the police force were doing. Why was this never picked up? And this is the one thing I can't believe, and all of the papers have the story, and it just gets worse every time you read it. And safety of women has been an issue now for a couple of years. It's been brought to the fore for the Sarah Everard murder, which was an appalling crime. And when you find out that this particular officer was at the same time, served in the same unit, although allegedly didn't know David Carrick, they didn't know each other, but it's the same unit.
Claire, could I ask you and Isabel, would you would you deal with police now differently than, say, Norman and I might as a result of these stories?
I think you are always going to be cautious. I think it is going to affect the instances that you have contact with the police, for sure. Absolutely is. I had a meeting locally with police on Friday, and they were 2 female officers. And that made me feel better. And it shouldn't make a difference. They are serving police officers, they are all trained, but it is. And I suddenly realised how much this had affected me, and I hadn't actually thought about it until that point.
Right, okay, let's move on to other stories. We've got in the Sun, Norman, this is a big one, a national security bill. You're worried about this. Why are you worried about this?
Well, I'm worried because as a Liberal, one of the things which motivates me is the balance of power between the state and the individual. And it seems to me what we're going through is authoritarianism from the government in a number of regards. They're making the right to strike ineffective. They're making it ineffective to demonstrate, preventing demos in some cases and limiting them on others. And we've got now this national security bill, which I'm familiar with, which is going to prevent matters which we think, we as a public, I think, ought to be known about, from being known about. And congratulations to the Sun for running it. It says, for example, should we know that the security service at Heathrow recently seized a potentially deadly shipment of uranium being smuggled into the UK? Yes, we should know that. It says, should we be permitted to know that the British Secret Service, MI5, used a foreign undercover agent after he violently and sexually assaulted his British partner and told her she would be killed by men in high places, a bit like the police. Should we know that? Yes, we should know that. And the danger with this bill is that it's going to clamp down on the release of information. And when you bring in extra powers for the police or the security services, you have to bring in safeguards in parallel, and they haven't done that. So one of the things I'm working on behind the scenes with others is to try to make sure there's a public interest defence, so that people can whistle-blow if they absolutely have to do so.
So why is there this move to tighten things up, to be more secretive?
Well, do you know, I think it's down to the Home Secretary and her team, largely, because when I got to the Home Office, I was told by the Permanent Secretary there are 2 sorts of Home Secretaries. There are authoritarian Home Secretaries and there are libertarian Home Secretaries. And it's not a party thing, because you get someone like David Blunkett, who was quite authoritarian, and Charles Clarke for Labour was very libertarian. And similarly, you had Amber Rudd, who I think was quite libertarian, and Priti Patel and Salal Bravman are not. That's a dividing line in the Home Office. And we're going down this road where where the power of the state is being increased at the expense of the power of the individual. And this is important because...
Okay, go on, because I wanted to pick you up, because you're making that point about the strikes, and you were saying that, this is clamping down on people's effective right to strike. But when you were talking about the situation in Scotland, and this is on the gender law, you were saying, why should one particular law in one area infringe laws in another area? Because, of course, the Gender Equality Act is not devolved. But let me just bear with me, trying to explain my point very badly here. On one side of the argument, you're saying they shouldn't infringe on rights. On the other hand, you're saying, well, OK, they should be allowed to strike at any cost, at the cost to patients, at the cost to children.
I wouldn't say they're allowed to strike at any cost. But the point about Scotland was the constitutional point as to whether or not what Scotland's done influences UK legislation by the back door. That's the issue there.
But with the strikes, the government are saying clearly, aren't they, that the right to strike is sacrosanct, but it's not absolute.
Well, they're saying it's sacrosanct, but it isn't. I mean, that's look. Let me go back to the 1930s in Germany. I don't want to be over dramatic about this, but there was a pastor Niemöller in the 1930s said, they came for the Jews and I was not a Jew, so I did nothing. They came for the trade unionists and I was not a trade union, I did nothing. They came for the homosexuals, I was not homosexual, I did nothing. And when they came for me, there was no one to speak out for me. This is the danger. You've got to allow people in a democracy to protest, even if it's inconvenient for other people. You've got to allow that. And the government is making it much more difficult for people to protest. Of course, we don't want strikes. We don't want services to interfere. But when you want to strike about something or you want to be in a demo, you have to be able to do so.
Norman, can I say, totally get what you're saying here, but are we not a conservative country by nature? And that, people watching this programme today will say, well, absolutely, security and safety and law and order must come first.
Law and order has to be very important, but law and order, we came back to discussion about this corrupt, offensive police officer. You have to have consensus policing. You have to have consensus. You have to believe that security services and the police are acting in the public interest. And the way you do that is to make them accountable. And this law here, which the son refers to, makes them less accountable.
Yeah, safeguarding can never be a bad thing, absolutely, when it's protecting freedom.
Well, is it a bad thing, Claire? This is a very interesting story you've picked out in the Times. The Home Office has told its staff to avoid language which would be gendered. So, for instance, I don't know if this would be regarded as gender. If I said to you and Isabel, hey guys, do you fancy going out for a bit of breakfast later? So is guys, have I called you two guys, or would it be worse if I called you mate?
Well, according to the Home Office, mate is not to be used. The Home Office are keen to stress that this was an internal document, it's not government policy. But it just highlights, I think, how concerned the Home Office is with such things and how offended people seem to have become. Are you
saying easily offended?
I am saying easily offended. If somebody calls me mate, I might look at them in a certain way because I'm not their mate, but I wouldn't be offended by it. I've heard worse during my time in the House of Commons, I can tell you that. But it's things like not using the word homosexual or homosexuality. But that's a word, a descriptor, everybody knows what it means. I don't see how that can be offensive.
Somebody who's homosexual, if not homosexual?
I don't know, because you're not also allowed to use the word gay lifestyle. So I'm not sure what it is they want people to refer to. And
this is where a lot of people, particularly older people, get very confused when it comes to language dealing with ethnicity, for instance.
And that's right, and I think this is where people get tied up in knots and they are worried about saying the wrong thing, and race is one of those issues. If you look back at words that we used 20, 30 years ago, we would shudder, but at the time were deemed acceptable, and people have to learn what the word is and what people want to be referred as. And I think this is a really dangerous path to go down if you're going to stop staff from using those kind of words. Something like mate in an email, well, okay, it's probably not the best word that you can use for somebody who actually isn't your friend, but I don't think it's offensive. I think that using the wrong pronoun is also not offensive because it is a confusing issue. The whole trans debate is very, very complicated and really very toxic, and nobody wants to offend. Everybody wants people to be respected.
Some people do want to offend.
I want to, but I think the majority don't.
I get this whole thing that you can't have enemies. I think if you don't have enemies, you must be a really boring person.
How do you learn?
I personally just think the Home Office should be focusing on more serious matters.
Well,
Yes.
absolutely.
Quite frankly.
I
Yes,
think
but the thing is, generally, and you're making this point. I mean, I come in here. I had a talk with the producer today, and he refers to, and it's a generational thing. Everybody is referred to by their first name, and then Claire's going to do this, and then Claire who? Claire who? You know, we get so many guests today. I'm trying to think which Claire or who's that going to be. Whereas I'm from a generation where everybody was called by their surname, or you give someone their full name and their title. Claire Purcell, who's a former Conservative advisor. You know, yeah, I get that. Claire who? Claire in the office. Claire who works in the canteen. Claire, who, you know.
No, I understand that. And coming from the House of Commons, we use everybody's surname, which is a little bit like a sort of boys' prep school, but the House of Commons really hasn't moved on that far. And you use people's surnames the whole time. Now, in other sectors, that would be decreed as pretty
Abusive
offensive
almost, yeah.
and abusive and not correct, especially towards women. Whereas that's kind of the culture that we work in, and I'm not offended. It is my surname, so therefore, if you want to call me that,
this thing, you know,
go ahead.
Women in general are much stronger than a lot of people, and much more robust than a lot of people sort of make out. Don't ever call her guy or mate or anything, because, you know, she...
Well, I'm sure if you said something to Isabel that she didn't like, she would tell you.
Have I ever?
Oh, I've told you. I've told you. Can we talk about the danger of rail crossings, Norman?
Yes, I don't mind being called mate. My best friend in America, who's female, calls me mate all the time.
I've got girlfriends that call each other mate.
Yeah,
mate.
there you go. Yeah, this is the story which is about this dreadful company which has now gone into liquidation, thank goodness.
We've got 30 seconds.
Okay, which has been calling 1.5 million spam calls a day, and the consequence of doing that is snagged up network rail systems, so people couldn't actually phone through with rail safety issues to do with level crossing. It's quite shocking, but why are we getting 1.5 million spam calls a day from this company?
Yeah, and somebody might die as a result
Absolutely.
of that. I know someone who was killed on a level crossing.
Did you?
Yeah, absolutely. Terrible. We've got white strawberries. Can we quick
white strawberry?
White strawberries. We were talking about
Pass them
these
down
earlier.
the line, have a strawberry.
So Claire, genuinely sink your
Go on,
teeth
have another
into
one. You
there.
love them.
And what do you think, Claire?
It's very, very, very sweet.
It is, isn't it?
It's
like
a
a
really odd
sweetie.
texture.
It's a
Pineapple.
watery texture.
Why are they white?
I don't know.
Genetically modified, I
But
assume.
somebody find out why they're white.
Rotten.
Maybe that's a natural thing. Maybe
Yeah,
that
they've
is.
been picked a bit early on.
Maybe they're just burnt in the sun or something like that.
We say goodbye to Claire Pearsall, Norman Baker. Thank you very much for everything, including your analysis of the strawberries. We'll have more for you after the break, including the latest on the Metropolitan Police's latest scandal. See you in a second.